Grassroots is brought to you by Work It, meeting the needs of entrepreneurs in Stillwater since 2017. Welcome to Grassroots, a podcast series for growing civic engagement through conversation. I'm Chris Peters.
And I'm Michelle Charles, and we're your hosts for this series.
So Michelle, why are we doing this?
Well, Chris, we believe that when it comes to public life, people tend to talk at each other or about each other way more than they talk to each other. And we wanted to create a place that encourages more meaningful conversations.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of soundbite politics.
I think we all are. So for the races we're talking about in this series, Election Day is February 8th. Early voting will begin February 3rd. On this ballot, voters in Stillwater are going to be asked to choose the next mayor and to decide a couple of propositions. One that would increase a dedicated sales tax for transportation, and one that would increase the city's visitor tax. Hi, welcome to Grassroots. I'm Michelle Charles.
And I'm Chris Peters.
And we're here today with Stillwater Mayor Will Joyce and Stillwater mayoral candidate Marc Trotter to have a conversation.
All right. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we wanted to kind of, because everyone loves a warm-up exercise, right? We all love those. We're going to play a game and get to know each other. No, but we figured we'd start with kind of an easy question. It's like, what is either your favorite song or what is something that has been just like running through your head lately? Is there something that's been stuck?
Music, albums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with favorites. People ask favorite movie, favorite song. I don't really have something I could pinpoint one way or the other. What's been stuck in my head this morning has been Great Is Thy Faithfulness, because we sang old hymns at church yesterday, and so that's one of my favorites, and I've been humming it this morning. But I was thinking, you mentioned this last night to ask that question. Most of my driving around and putting up signs has been to Turnpike Troubadours.
Oh, yeah.
Country Americana band that has been on hiatus for a couple of years.
Are you trying to will them back into...
Oh, they're back.
They're back.
Yeah,
people are super excited.
I've tried to get tickets 5 or 6 times to their new shows and can't ever get them. So, but I've been listening to them in the car as I've been driving around
close? Town. How far away would you have to go for some of these shows?
Well, they've got a show at Cain's in Tulsa coming up in April. But those tickets went in like 2 seconds, and they're on, the resale sites for like $600. So that's definitely outside of my price range.
All right, here's the funny thing. There were enough legislators who tried to get Turnpike Troubadours tickets that we may see legislation on like some of this robo stuff where the resellers are snapping up all the tickets and then throwing them back out.
It's been crazy.
Is that like the online version of scalping, basically?
Yeah.
It's online scalping. I mean, these ticket companies are just, by the time they release the show and by the time you can actually get in and buy tickets, all of them are sold. But hey, here's a resale site where your $50 face value ticket can be purchased for $350.
Yeah, they just
sort of like,
what is it, like auto dialers or whatever? I mean, they just hoover them all up.
Is that the free market though? Supply and demand?
Sure it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but with an unfair advantage, I would say.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. What about you, Marc?
Well, the song that's been on repeat, I've just been listening to it a lot, and it's been popping into my head. It's real out of left field. It's Deathbed by Relient K, but not for the reasons you would think based on the name.
Okay.
So this song is about the story of the sky. It starts off, the first words are, I can smell the death on the sheets, covering me. I can't believe this is the end. But this is my deathbed. I lie here alone. This is my deathbed. I lie here alone. If I close my eyes tonight, I know I'll be home. And then it goes through this 10-minute story of his whole life and all these things he's done and all these regrets he has. And it's like he has all this regret. Things just keep blowing up. His dad left when he was young. His mom claimed he went to go preaching and all this stuff and all that stuff. He got abandoned, right? And then he gets older. He gets married at 21. They get a divorce. They split. She ends up with the kids. He ends up going to the bowling alley, just drinking himself to death every day. It's just depressing.
Yeah, this is
it's horrible. But
that's a lot of song.
Oh yeah. So I'm like, and I'm listening to it, and here's the interesting beauty though.
Okay.
He keeps at the end tying it back, he says, if I close my eyes tonight, I know I'll be home. And then he unpacks that slowly throughout the song. It gets to the point where he reveals, like, I've turned my life to Jesus despite everything I've done. And if I was even given the chance to do it all, I'd probably do it again because that's human nature. But Jesus Christ is faithful, and he always comes through, and I'm recognizing my need for him. And even though I lay here now and I've wasted my entire life, and I'm paying the price. I've got terminal cancer, all this stuff. I'm dying because of my terrible life choices.
Yeah.
The Lord is faithful.
Wow.
And he's coming back for me. And then it goes through this beautiful 2-minute instrumental thing where it's these horns playing, and it's like they're carrying him to heaven. They get to the part where John Foreman comes on. He says, I am the way, the truth. Follow me and take my hands. I am the way, the truth. Embrace me and you'll understand. And I am the light, and through me you'll live again. For I am love. I am love. I am love. It's just this beautiful turnaround where it's like this redemption story.
How long is this song, Mark? This
12
sounds like one of
minutes.
those 1970s, like it's a whole
a rock
album
opera.
side.
I live for that stuff. Like, my favorite band is called Dream Theater. They write like
Okay.
12
Yeah.
to 30-minute songs.
They do, yeah.
Super
Okay.
nerdy,
Yeah.
I live for that stuff. But yeah,
Okay.
so this is a 12-minute song.
Gotcha. All right.
So
well,
not just a song stuck in his head, a whole play.
it is. It is. It's like an opera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you both basically brought up, faith songs. If you don't mind, Will, what church do you regularly attend?
I go to University Heights Baptist Church.
Okay.
Down on Knobloch. I've been, I was baptized there in 1990. So it's been my home church for a long time. Well, off and on, moves to St. Louis and stuff in between. But yeah, I'm been a member there and currently serve as a deacon. I've been on a few committees and that sort of thing. So that's been my home church for a while.
Very cool. And you, Mark?
I've been attending Life Church in Stillwater for 15 years. So not quite as long, but I started volunteering to do the lighting like 14 or 15 years ago. Just randomly, it dropped in my lap. Someone was like, "Hey, I heard you want to do tech," and I said, "Okay, great." Walk in, and they're like, "Yeah, so you're going to learn how to do lighting today," and I said, "Okay."
And then that turns
I'm sure-
into a business.
And it turned into
it turned into a livelihood. And
Wow.
I started, got asked to start filling in on keys pretty soon after. So I'm doing lighting and keys, and I started doing that. I just hit a full decade this last Christmas.
Okay.
And so...
And keys for people that don't, that's keyboard.
Oh, sorry, yeah, keyboards, piano,
And I think I even saw
synthesizers.
that includes a keytar.
Heck yeah, it does.
Ooh. Okay. I want to see that someday.
All right.
Sounds like fun.
I've got a video I'll show you in a
All
bit.
right.
Is it?
very good.
It's more fun to dance with a keytar than like trying to move at a normal keyboard, right?
It's different. It just depends. It's different. I mean, you've got people like Jerry Lee Lewis. I mean, who he's just ripping it up on that thing, catching the piano on fire in some cases. It's
Sure.
freaking awesome. And then you got the keytar. It's like this axe. You're just like, yeah, rock and metal.
Oh, that's fun. Okay. I'm just thinking of this Flight of the Conchords song now, but
But so those worship songs, that kind of also fits with the bands that you guys and the music that you mentioned. A little bit different worship service at University Heights and at Life Church, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we sang some old stuff this last week, yesterday, but normally it's usually more sort of modern worship, probably closer to what
Okay.
Life
Well,
Church does.
I have to say, I was raised in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I have a deep love for a traditional service, I have to say.
Yeah.
I love a mass. I love it when they bust out the Latin.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for stained glass and incense. Oh my goodness. And I remember the first time I went to a Protestant church, when people were like, "Oh, amen," and they were saying things, and I'm like, "Y'all need to go to the cry room." You're being
A little too loud, yeah.
disruptive.
This is irreverent.
There's an
sorry,
actual scheduled time
there
for call and
is.
response.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
And you could go and look up what hymns you're going to sing weeks and months ahead of time.
Exactly. And I find something deeply comforting about
years.
that.
Yeah,
I could go,
very predictable.
I could go anywhere in the world
Yeah.
and go to a church service, and it would feel very familiar.
Yeah.
And there's something deeply comforting about that. I don't go to church anymore, but when I go back home to visit, like my grandma passed away, but when I would go back home to visit her, we would all have to go to mass, and there's something about it that felt like going home.
Sure.
I will say. Yeah. So I like the traditional hymns and things too.
When I was in St. Louis, I spent a few years taking classes at seminary at Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, which is a Presbyterian Church in America seminary. So it's more liturgical, a little bit more formal in terms of worship and that sort of thing, how things work. And I do enjoy that. I've gone, there's a PCA church here in town, and we attended there for a while when we first moved back. And I do, you kind of, that structure, kind of knowing what's coming and having a little bit more, just the liturgy is comforting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But there's, I think everybody has a different style and worships in their own way. And my in-laws go to the Catholic Church, and so we've been a couple times with them. And the church here in town is beautiful.
It's so gorgeous.
And it is a wonderful service to be a part of when you go in there and take part in Mass.
Yeah, it is absolutely gorgeous.
I was in the opposite, so not to talk too much about myself, but I worked in the ministry for a handful of years in Oklahoma City, and our church was one of those where worship sometimes, is kind of scheduled to last for about maybe, 20 to 30 minutes, but then it was also sometimes, the Spirit might be moving and you're going for an hour.
Yeah.
And some people... Some people that wore them out.
Yeah.
They were just like, I don't know what to expect. Is church going to be an hour long? Is it going to be 3 hours long?
Yeah.
I
And
can see that.
People like to know when lunch is going to be served.
Yeah.
That is true. You want to know
especially
when
if it's a non-communion day and you don't get your little cracker and juice.
Yeah, well, they're not very filling. I'm
No.
just going to say.
Like
Spiritually
10 calories?
satisfying, but not so much physically.
Yeah.
Sorry, body of Christ.
Yeah. You guys, okay, we were talking about faith. You guys have both kind of addressed the idea of, your faith, publicly.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does your faith inform your decision to seek public office and how you make your decisions? Let's just start with, let's see. Will went first last time. Let's start with Marc.
Okay, so how does it...
And we'll jump in if there's a question
Sure.
you have. This is a conversation. It's not a...
So one more time.
Yeah. Just how does your faith inform your decision to seek public office and how you approach making decisions?
How it informs my decision to seek public office. Well, it comes down to you view the scripture through a certain lens, and everybody has their filters, right? And so when the world doesn't line up to your filters on what that is, and I admittedly, we all have our own filters we look at. If it doesn't quite line up, you'll feel compelled to jump in. So that, there's that. As far as how it influences my way I would run it, it would affect everything. I'll go back to the scripture on all of it, there's parts of it where it was within that certain sphere, that timeline in the Bible, right? And then Jesus came and fulfilled the law, brought the law of liberty and the law of love, and then he fulfilled the covenant, right? But as far as that, it'll affect everything, as I've said previously in all the different ways. It's pretty open-ended, but
Okay, well...
Yeah, I think, like Marc said, I think your faith, whatever your faith is, a sincerely held religious view of the world informs everything we do, right? My worldview is shaped by what I believe about who created the world and the fact that Jesus is the Son of God and that he came to redeem the world, and that his life and his sacrifice for me informs everything I do as a person. In terms of how that relates to public service, I think the thing that I take away from Christ and Christ's life and sort of my religious viewpoint is that we are all called to be of service. We're all called to be of service to each other, to help our neighbors in whatever way we can. We're called to be people who respond to the needs of those around us. I mean, that's the story of Jesus's life, right? Is that, or at least his 3 some years of ministry, where he's, that's what he does. He goes around and helps people in a lot of ways. And so, being called to public service or feeling like, like this is a place where I can serve is really born out of that idea of I'm somebody who is supposed to serve, right? That's how I was raised. I mean, my dad was a deacon in the church. He was the guy out there handing out cookies and stuff in the lobby when service was over or whatever. And it's just been part of my life to say, well, I have a skill set. How do I use it? And that is, I think, directly born out of my faith. In terms of how that influences my decision making, certainly, again, that viewpoint on how can I help? What can I do in this role, whether it's as mayor or as a guy on the street in my neighborhood? What can I do in the place that I'm at that will help other people around me? And so that's the way those decisions are made. In terms of how specific religious dogma gets applied to secular civic government. We live in a country that has a separation of church and state, where we're not, our Constitution forbids the institution of religion through government. And so I don't feel it's my job to compel anyone to any sort of religious belief through my work in civic government. But it certainly informs the decisions I make. And so, it's a difficult place sometimes, right? When your personal religious beliefs and what's happening in a civic government setting, they're not always going to be directly in line sometimes. And so you have to sort of fall back on, my job here is to serve. What can I do here that's going to be most beneficial to the people in this community?
I mean, and when you're making decisions as well, I mean, you have to look at what is going to have, I'm assuming it's almost like a utilitarian sort of way of looking at it, where you're trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. What else plays into making decisions when you're on, I mean, this is basically just for Will because he's been up there making those decisions. But I mean, what other kinds of criteria play into making your decisions when you're up there? I mean, they're not all easy, obviously.
No, they're not. And I think you've got all the criteria that go into it, right? All the different viewpoints, the research, whatever the information is out there that informs the decision to be made. And then there's sort of the decision-making criteria. How am I going to weigh what? Right. And I think the criteria, it's in and of itself in this job, should always be, how can I do the most good for the most people in the community? Right. What is in the best interest? I mean, that's what local government is, right? It's all of us coming together and saying, okay, we're going to live in a community. We're going to share some resources so that we can all more efficiently, do our lives. And in a decision-making role there, my job is to say, okay, what's the best thing for the most number of people? Informed, of course, then by, well, what's the law that's in place? What's, you've got, it's colored by all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, if the law says this is the way something's supposed to happen, that's going to be the primary lens that we judge it through, right? Even though you may look at that sometimes and go, well, I'm not sure that the way this is set up is actually going to do the most good for the most people, but it is in fact the legal standard that we have. Marijuana dispensaries.
I knew that was going to be that was going to be the example.
A specific example that pops into my head, right? I'm not convinced that having a marijuana dispensary on every corner in this community is the best thing for our community.
Right.
It's just personally, I don't think it's the way to go. But we have a legal framework that we operate under that's given to us by the state. And so I vote, yeah, okay, you can have a specific use permit to run your dispensary because that's what the law says, you're able to do. So it's a lot of gray, right?
Well,
a lot of gray areas there.
Let me ask you on that, because when, especially when we had Councilor Wedlake and Vice Mayor Pat Darlington for a while there, they were almost a guaranteed no vote on those. But was there an aspect of, I mean, if you guys really did all vote no, then that opens up, some legal challenges,
we'd
right?
get sued right away.
And so I kind of felt it was like every time one of those came up, it was like, Wedlake and Darlington are going to be able to vote no, but that's because they know the other three are going to vote yes.
Yeah, that was kind of the pattern that got established. Right. I mean, and Dr. Wedlake expressed very clearly early in that process why he was voting no on those and his medical opinion on the whole situation. And so we certainly respect that, and I respect his fervent belief and his, continuing to vote that way based on his belief. But yeah, I mean, from a pragmatic perspective, everyone recognizes that we don't really have a lot of leeway there. We don't have any discretion, really. We have to approve them as long as they meet the criteria. And so, yeah, it worked out that we were able to pass, we passed them all without having to go through the courts.
Well, and I can see where the idea of servant leadership, the idea of, your faith, calling you to serve really does make a lot of sense. I mean, my personal opinion, my personal perspective on it is that leadership it's a responsibility, and it's not that fun. Honestly, people think it's going to be really cool. It's not about telling people what to do. It's not about, cool stuff. I mean, sometimes it's about cool stuff. You get to do cool stuff every once in a while. But a lot of times it's a lot of responsibility for taking care of people. And, I think that it can be a burden. And I think that anyone who is willing to do that and who's willing to pick that up and take it on certainly deserves a lot of credit. So, I mean, but credit to both of you for for pursuing this and being willing to take that on, and certainly Will for 6 years of doing the job. Absolutely.
I wanted to wrap back. That was an excellent answer. I mean, I was like, yes, 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 all yes.
Absolutely. So
I think,
go ahead.
Mark and I come from the same faith tradition. I mean, we probably disagree on certain aspects of it, which is fine. That's why there are 600 Christian denominations out there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
seriously.
how that works. But I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, that idea of servant leadership and saying, hey, I've got a skill set, or I've got something here I can share. I'm obligated to do so.
And the cool thing is, one day we'll both, I believe, be sitting on heaven's shores, Will and I, and we'll look at each other and we'll go, man, what were you thinking? We'll both say that to each other, and we'll be, I don't know. I'm like, laughing about it. It's great. Like, we're like, oh, well, we're here now. Praise God.
There you go.
I think that's neat. I'm excited for that. So,
well, very good. Now, in the meantime, before you get there, you got a little more time.
There is some work to do.
You got some work to do. Okay, so let's talk about city council in particular. It's very clear that you guys have, some differing approaches in terms of what you think the priorities of local government might be, and then also for what local government's role is in protecting the public, or what it should be protected from. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. You want to go first this time, Will?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, local government, I sort of mentioned this a second ago, but I mean, local government, the whole idea of local government is kind of the primary level of social, cooperation, right? We live together in a community. We kind of figured out that it's not great to everybody to build their own road to their office, or everybody to hire their own private security force. So we pool our resources in some of those areas, and we say, okay, here's the things that it's more efficient and more effective for us to do together, and we're gonna work together to provide those things. And certainly public safety in general is a big part of that. I mean, 3/4 of our general operating budget in the city of Stillwater is spent on police and fire and public safety, right? Because that's one of the things we as a community value the most, right? We want to make sure we're being kept safe. We're being protected from people who steal cars and drive them around town at high rates of speed, or people who, choose to make bad decisions that are a threat to other folks. And so, or just natural disasters, wildfires, that sort of thing. I mean, these are all issues that we need to come together and help protect each other from. So, local government has a huge responsibility in that arena. Question, what the problems or the issues of local government become is when we start to decide, okay, well, what exactly should we be protecting each other from? What should we be focusing on? What should we be spending this communal money on? Is this thing worth it? Is that thing worth it? And that's, I think, where the issues come in, and the questions of how do we make those decisions? Who should I be listening to, right? If the police chief comes to me and says, hey, we need body cameras because, here's some reasons we think this would be good for our officers. We think it'd be good for the public. We think, I'm not a professional police officer. I'm not a I've certainly studied police and procedure and all that sort of thing since I've been engaged in this role. But I'm going to say, well, I appreciate that, Chief Watts. That's a good perspective. I appreciate the fact that the officers have presented this. And yes, this seems like a good decision for our public safety overall. So, it's our job on the council to sort of take that input from the people that, we see as experts, the people who do this on a day-to-day basis, and say, this is what we think is the best thing going forward to protect the public safety at large. We can get into public health and how that affects it, but certainly some aspect of public health is considered part of the city's responsibility to protect. At that point, I think it just gets into nuances of what do you think is really worth fighting against, and what do you think is worth protecting the community against, and what do you not? And I think that's really where the disagreements here are about.
Sure. I mean, and you guys were under a different kind of pressure during all of this with the pandemic, I believe, because usually you've got some type of action at the state level, at the federal level, or whatever. And it felt like during this, a lot of the decisions were kind of pushed down to the local level in the name, perhaps, of being more responsive to what was going on in that particular community. But also, maybe it kind of felt like a lack of support at times.
Well, I mean, that's a common, I think that's I prefer local control. I prefer that the community that is most affected by a certain situation has the largest share of the responsibility and the ability to affect change on those issues. So I'm a small government, local control sort of person.
So even when it comes to plastic bags? Even when it comes to
plastic bags, I think that absolutely is a choice that communities should be able to make for themselves. When you start talking, what was so weird about this pandemic is that now you're talking about something that is, one, global, two, not easily contained within a city limit or within a county limit or a state limit. There and the interaction between all kinds of different governments and levels of government on how to deal with an issue like this becomes really, really complicated. So I think there's a tough balance. I think states and cities all over the world have struggled with exactly what that balance should look like. And the United States is unique in its federal system. The national government doesn't have any police power over us locally. They can't tell us to go wear masks. They can't tell us to do those sorts of things. That's not in a legitimate sense, that's not police power that the federal government has. And so there's some of that's got to be balanced. We've got to figure out, how does that work? So it's been a struggle to try to balance how our government system works and what's best for our community and how is our community being supported by other communities around us. I think with the pandemic, one of the big problems was that we didn't have a unified response in our state. Certainly, I appreciated the fact that cities were allowed to do, to take certain measures on their own, but I think it would have been a whole lot more effective if we've been able to have a wider, more consistent approach on a wider basis.
Yeah, because we're not islands. You know, we're not like New Zealand where we could just say, "Hey, nobody can come ashore," or if another connected community that say they want to go by a different set of rules. Well, we share people, coming back and forth.
One of the big issues that I talked about from the beginning is if you look at Stillwater Medical Center, based here in Stillwater, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the patients that Stillwater Medical Center has treated for COVID over the last couple of years have been from places outside of Stillwater, right? And so the precautions or whatever it is we do in Stillwater may not even have that much effect on what happens with Stillwater Medical Center because other communities maybe aren't taking the same approaches or they're being affected by other things that are happening elsewhere. And so it's very, very complicated, and it's unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of control outside of our own community, and that's why we have to try to figure out what's the best thing we can do to affect the most number of people and to protect safety at the highest level we can.
Okay. Well, and I think being kind of a regional hub probably complicates it a little bit too.
Sure. Yeah.
So what do you think, Mark?
Okay, question again.
All right.
I lost the question.
Let me. I think I could set you up on here. So you have mentioned before, that we do not live. Our country is not designed as a mob rule.
Right.
And so how do you take some of the decisions, especially that the mayor and Will Council made, and if we put it through your filter and your principles, on, is this taking away somebody's liberty by, passing a mask mandate or shutting down businesses? I know it's going to be kind of where you're coming from, right?
Yeah. And it's that whole, we both care about people. That's a fact. It's clear. Our approach is different. To me, from that biblical lens, I can't get away from it. And obviously, he can't either. It's just a different approach. God is set at the highest level of liberty in the universe. And I haven't re-listened to the, but I can't remember if I mentioned this previously, but he's at the greatest level, right? He could have begot children who were slaves. He didn't. He created children who have that same liberty to make choices of right or wrong.
Free will.
Exactly. Free will to do good or to do bad. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty, right? And then there's all kinds of liberty verses all throughout the New Testament that when you look back at the creation of the world, it's all right there at the beginning. God could have created us to just automatically love him and choose him. That would be the best thing for us. That is. Every one of us in our capacities that our opinion is with regard to our individual religious perspectives, we agree with that mindset, right? Generally. At least if you're a believer in something, you're going to agree you need to honor that God. And so that's the best thing you can do. However, he allowed us the ability to choose something that would ultimately damn us. He allowed me the latitude to not do right, even to the point of death. And then he came back, and I go to the 10 Commandments, and he reaffirmed it with the 8th commandment, which says, thou shalt not steal. So he afforded me this right to make these choices. And then he turned around and said, oh, and don't steal. Don't steal. Well, logic dictates, and I know it's not perfect. I'm sure Will can come up with a lot of reasons where there's holes in that from an individual standpoint.
Sure.
But from a societal standpoint, I don't see those. Thou shalt not steal. If I steal your ability to make those choices, I'm stealing something that God himself gave you. Now, if I step in and stop you, it is my job to protect you from others. That's where these gray areas come in. That's where we're having these discussions, right? I might come your way, you might come my way. I'm not sure, and that's where it gets complicated, particularly in a council situation where you might have, even if you had 5 people with different perspectives on it, eventually it's just what the majority thinks, right? And it's just complicated. And I think when you go back to liberty, to me, that's the most gracious thing I can give you. I allow you and your family units to make the right choices for yourselves. If you can't deal with staying inside, which we didn't have as bad of lockdowns around here, it really wasn't. Honestly, compared to a lot of places around the world, it really wasn't that bad. That, to me, I can't get away from the fact that everything I just said, it's still not something I would choose to do. But the reality is with the liberty choice, I can afford you the most grace, and to me it seems the most love to do what you feel is right for your household. You mentioned, where you wanted to respond.
Well, no, I don't disagree with that on a philosophical level. I guess my question is where, when I asked this in a forum the other night, which laws are okay for us to pass and which laws aren't, right? We do have a system of laws in our community that require you to wear seatbelts, that require you to obey speed limits, that require you to, we have zoning in the city of Stillwater that says you can't build a coffee shop on your house, where your house is, right? There are certain amounts where we as a society have said, these are ways in which we're going to limit our own personal liberty for the good of the community as a whole. And I struggle to figure out where you draw that line, which ones are okay and which ones aren't.
Yeah. And you're right. And I have to work through every single one of those, right? Every time I'm presented with one, I have to stop, look at it, think, and sleep on it, frankly. You guys do probably, and you've done for the past 6 years. It's just different. But with the zoning issues, I'd look at it and be like, okay, who's having the most taken from them in this decision? Who's having the most wrongfully taken from them in this? At least I think, from my filter. And then I discuss it with the people who made recommendations, right? Just like you do. And usually they have really well thought out criteria. They bring to you years of reasons on why they've come up with these approaches. But I still go back to that baseline, that original principle of, am I stealing from you? Am I? I don't know. I want to start over, right? And just from a fresh perspective, is this occurring? Is there something I'm stealing from you when I'm doing this?
Well, what about specifically with the pandemic is, okay, if somebody's, you can't tell them to wear a mask or distance themselves because the whole point is it's kind of takes a little bit of faith to believe in a virus that you can't see, right? But you could see the effects. And so the freedom to harm one another is really the question.
I think what it really is we assume risk when we leave our house every day. And this is, obviously a philosophical area where all four of us will have a different opinion about. The way I tend to see it is if I leave my house, I assume risk. I get in my car, I could get in a wreck, or if it's icy outside, I could walk out, an icicle could drop right on me, kill me right on the spot. I could get bit by something and just die. There's all kinds of things that could happen. I could go fly in a plane and die. That's not as likely as some of the other things, but I could. There's all kinds of things. And so the reality is I weigh that risk out, right? And I say, I think it's worth the risk today. I'm going to go. But maybe for my neighbor's household.
But this is a sorry to come back on this.
Sure.
Like a car crash, that's not contagious. I mean, I guess you could crash your car and cause multiple crashes.
We've seen that.
But,
okay. I see.
But if you say you get sick and then you pass something on, you're continuing this perpetual like nonstop thing where you're like, well, I shouldn't be told to not like, oh, I'm not dying, so why should I care? I got my freedom.
Well, and honestly, the fact of the matter is you could pass something. The reality is things do happen. Sometimes things you don't want to happen, you didn't mean to happen. Oops, I gave this to someone, right?
Yeah.
And you have to live with that. Now, here's the kicker. I remember early on, just like all of us, it's like, what are we dealing with? What's going on? This looks scary. I remember thinking that. I was like, I don't think I want to leave the house. I had grocery deliveries, and I would literally take Lysol and spray everything. I'd put on gloves, flip it, spray it, because I didn't want to cross-contaminate. I didn't know what I was dealing with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I was very thorough with it. And then one day, something switched. I was like, you know what? What could happen is all the older people who have their family and friends who have some food in their houses, they'll hopefully stay home for a few more weeks, and then people young like me who can afford to get that sickness, I can get it for the good of everyone else, bring it back home, stay in bed, don't go out again, because I'm not going to run around and spread it. If I know I'm sick, I'll stay home.
Sure.
That's that personal responsibility part. I'll get it, stay home. All of a sudden, the immunity rises, and then voila. I mean, I know it's not always voila, but that's what I was thinking. That's the mindset. If you can't afford that risk, you stay home until the rest of us who can afford it.
And you're saying that's if you know that you're sick, where there's some people that are asymptomatic and don't know.
Right.
I suppose I haven't seen convincing evidence of that kind of spread.
Okay.
But yeah, sure. Yes. I mean, assuming it is real, then yeah, that's assuming that.
Well, I mean, and I think I look back on those good old days when we thought, yeah, we're just going to shut it down for a few weeks. We're going to shut it down for a month. We're going to flatten that curve and it's all going to be good. Then we're going to rock on. And it didn't work out that way. Here we are 2 years later with different variants and things. And
higher spread than almost ever, at least numbers-wise.
My mom just got over having a pretty serious case. She didn't wind up in the hospital, but she was sick for a couple of weeks, and she's just now kind of getting back to normal. And she's still got like a little tremor in her hand. She's kind of weak and tired. So, I mean, this happens. But okay, so beyond COVID, there are so many things that you have to deal with.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, just real quick. I just want to maybe make the point or ask the question. COVID aside, or the specifics of COVID. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people, this way or that way, that kind of thing. What's the best decision to make, right? I mean, if it's clearer that this, I mean, if this is Ebola spreading, I think you mentioned that at some point.
Yeah, I have said
right?
that.
I mean,
yeah,
you'd go, oh well, clearly this is a bigger problem. We've got to do something about this.
I'm going to stay home in that case.
Sure. I guess my concern or my question is, it's you've made the statements that these are not, somehow this is either not constitutional, that the city would even be able to do this kind of thing or take these kind of measures. And really what I feel like it comes down to is whether you agree or don't agree with the threat or the risk here being high enough to justify the action by the city or the state or whoever's taking the action, right? And so that's a different question. Do we have the authority to do it versus was there enough evidence for us to exercise that authority to do it? And I think, based on what you're saying, I mean, yeah, you can go out and get in a car wreck. You can go out and, whatever. But we have laws in our society that regulate how you drive a car to protect each other from getting in car wrecks, right? We have laws in our society that regulate how you can use machinery to keep people from getting hurt, to, all kinds of things that we've stepped in and said, hey, there's a risk here. We think it's a legitimate risk. Please don't do that because we want to protect both you and the people that are around you. And so, but the arguments that I feel like you and some of the folks that you've kind of been associated with have made are not, we don't believe that the risk is high enough. It's, you don't have the legitimate authority to do this in the first place. And that's my question is, do we have the authority to do it? You just don't agree with the factors that we've considered to make that? Or do we not have the authority? Does the city not have the authority to make these kinds of laws at all? Because if that's the case, we got to get rid of a whole lot of other laws.
Yeah. When I say they don't have the authority, I'm referring to the biblical authority, right? That same liberty thing. The whole God begot that liberty unto us.
Okay, but did God beget my liberty to drive 50 in a school zone? I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, from a practical
I understand,
perspective.
and I haven't gone down that path.
Okay.
I've heard some constitutional guys I've listened to said, yeah, speed limits are unconstitutional. I haven't gone down that path. I have not thought that through, so I can't give you a good answer to that. But I see where you're coming from. Yeah. And honestly, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought that one out.
I mean,
and
it's
so
public.
I
Streets are
that.
public property with your private property on there.
Right.
So which overrides, the public or the private?
And you're right.
And our laws say the public because, well, you go back and look at the early days of cars and lots of kids were dying in the streets.
Yeah, I actually went through a genealogy search and I found multiple distant relatives who got hit on the side of a highway.
Oh, wow.
By cars, like in between Tulsa and Cleveland or something, But okay, what was the question?
Well,
again?
I understand where you're coming from philosophically and
yeah.
theologically with what you describe as sort of everybody's liberty, but if you were elected to be the mayor,
mm-hmm.
I mean, how would you approach these other kinds of laws? Is if it's restricting my freedom to build a coffee shop in my front yard, if it's restricting my freedom to drive 50 in a school zone, if it's restricting my freedom to, wander around with who knows what, right? Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we can. Are those unconstitutional because, or against God's law because He created us to be free individuals? Or are those legitimate things that you as the mayor of this community would help to enforce?
So I would take it one thing at a time, right? So the reality is I don't have a compelling I haven't gone through the speed limit thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to ride that train for the time being, okay? That's just the reality of the fact. Just like you do with a lot of things, right? You're like, I don't like it, like you said, but honestly, I haven't come up with a good compelling reason. Yeah, there's the liberty thing.
You kind of want to be able to study every single situation.
I want to study everything out, right? And just like you say, get the specialist opinion, but then go back to the philosophy of, am I stealing from you, right? So can I build a coffee shop on my lot? Well, if I picked a neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA, well, can I?
As an elected official and as a member of our city council, you're dealing with an established framework of laws. You're dealing with a city charter.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a set of municipal codes. You're dealing with zoning.
Yeah. And
I mean, that's this whole framework that, I mean, regardless, you still kind of have to work within.
Yes.
So how are you?
He rightfully pointed out, you're going through all those filters. You have to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, you have to consider it. I can't run in there and just start, well, we're going to steamroll my ideology onto every single. No, that's not.
So how
we
do you
can't
reconcile them?
do
How
that.
do you work those? How do you mesh
man.
those things?
It's
then?
well, a lot of sleeping and thinking on it. Honestly, one thing at a time. To be perfectly honest.
Let me give you an example
Sure,
that
yeah.
you just mentioned was eminent domain was criminal. So let's say there's a scenario that comes up where, for whatever reason, the city needs to acquire some land and use eminent domain.
Yeah.
But you're in that you believe that should be illegal.
Yeah.
Is that an automatic no for you, or?
Yeah, more than likely, like 99% of the time, I think it'd be safe to say that I'd say, nope, no way, not doing it.
No matter what the other factors are.
I'll listen to them and I'll consider them. That's why I say 99%. But the reality is I can't think of a time where that could be reconcilable with regards to stealing their property, unless we can give them a compelling reason to sell it.
Well, that's how eminent domain works, is that we have we have to prove a compelling reason. And by the way, I mean, I'm not even sure we have exercised eminent domain. If we have,
since
it
OSU,
may have been,
right?
Well, yeah, and that doesn't have anything to do with the city. We may have looked at this kind of thing when it comes to like Perkins Road and the easements.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to move sewer lines over so that we can widen Perkins Road. And there may be an owner who's saying, well, I mean, because you go in and you offer them fair market value. Okay, hey,
Sure.
this little 10-foot strip of land is worth $15,000. Here's your $15,000.
Right. Yeah.
If they say no, you either get to say, okay, well, this little 40-foot section of Perkins Road is going to be narrower because this guy wouldn't sell us 15 feet of land so that we could move the road wider. Or you say, the community at large has an interest in acquiring this. It's a legitimate reason. Everybody understands that this is a good reason, and $15,000 is a fair price for the pay for this property. Here's your $15,000. We get the land. That's how eminent domain works. It's not stealing. It's paying fair market value for the property. It's just that you're able to, the will of the community is able to make that happen when there's a compelling public interest. That's in the Constitution. I mean, that is part
right.
of,
Yeah, it's enshrined. If they do take it, they have to reimburse you for it.
and we pay, have to pay fair market value. I think those are just those. I mean, I get from an ideological perspective, and I appreciate that you have a strong, ideological standing that you're sort of basing that on. But I think there are so many of these little issues like this that don't really line up with, or it's going to be very difficult for you to figure out how to go forward.
I agree with. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. It will be difficult. Yeah. So first off, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Secondly, let me go back to that eminent domain. My question is, who owns it?
Does it matter?
It absolutely matters.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's private property. The guy owns it. I mean, that's the point of government at any level, is at some level, we as a society, when we say we're going to live together in a society, we are going to have to figure out how to give up small parts of our individual right or our individual liberty for the good of the community. I mean, that's what the Constitution was set up to do, to say, how do we do that in a way that's not one guy telling you, you've got to give me your land.
Right.
It's set up with a system of laws that say, listen, we're going to let you do what you want with your property 95% of the time. But there are going to be times when the community comes and says, hey, we're not going to let you put a coffee shop in your front yard because the guy next to you is going to be really upset if you've got 20 cars driving in and out of your front yard and you've got lights on all night and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So there are, in our Constitution, that's the beauty of our constitutional system, is that we have a very clear set of ways of due process that allows the government in those places to say, okay, if you want to take this, there is a real long process you have to go through. I practiced takings law in St. Louis. We did rails to trails work where somebody was taking an easement and we had to go compensate. We actually litigated on behalf of the owners to say, hey, you want to take this, you have to pay us fair market value. Mm-hmm. So those things exist because as a society, we've got to have those places where in very, clear circumstances under due process of law, that we as a community act in concert together. And that's, I think, the difficulty of the idea of we're all kings. Yeah. We can all do what we want. Well, we can, but we all live in a pretty small area.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out how to live together.
And so I think it comes back to, for me, and I know for you it's different, and that's okay.
Sure.
that at the end of the day, the nice thing is we both agree we're trying to help the community.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing. For me, it comes back to, I believe my job is to protect your rights on your property. And so I'm here to stand in the gap for the community. Not that you're not, right? Just in this particular version, I'm trying to stand in the gap for the individual despite what the group wants. And obviously, you're kind of saying the same thing. It's just a different spin on it.
It's just the circumstances under which
Yeah.
it requires something more to happen, right? And that's what I think I wanted to kind of get at when I jumped in here, was just to say, clearly there are circumstances where the good of the community is going to outweigh the right of an individual under, pretty narrow circumstances. And how do you, we have to figure out, if you're sitting on council, you have to figure out what criteria would need to be in place for me to say, I represent the community at large and I have to act for the best interest of the community, even though some individuals may not agree with it.
Yeah.
Right. Because there are going to be times where that has to happen. And
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful from you to hear where you think those circumstances would be. Because from what I've heard, you don't feel like you're saying there aren't any circumstances where it's okay. And clearly that can't be the case, because that's not even you can't live in a society if you don't think that there's some cases where that might be the case. So that's the part I think it would be helpful to clarify from you, Marc, is just what are the circumstances where you feel like the government or society in general can impose a general good of the society argument over a right of an individual?
Well, as I said, I gotta go back and investigate those individually, look at the historical context, right? Because sometimes I'll look at laws and I'll say, that doesn't look right to me. But then when I go and read the arguments for it, I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, right? Like you're saying,
absolutely.
the reality is I don't want to walk in with my eyes closed, and so I can agree. There's scenarios, like the will of the people,
Sure.
the will of the people stuff. Those are areas where you add those filters. It's like, okay, the reality is the society voted on this thing, and then everybody here at large agreed it was a will of the people decision. That I guess that would be an example, like with the Constitution, with the city charter, with state constitutional law, all those things. That's kind of where that kind of overrules my opinion and my desire to protect your individual rights and property. It kind of overrules it. And the reality is you're going to have 4 other counselors who might have completely different opinions from me, and actually very likely will. So, and that's okay. It's an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your thoughtful approach to it.
I appreciate you too.
So we're within a couple minutes of running out of time here. So did you guys have anything else you want to say? In terms of we were thinking about asking about if either one of you serves as mayor. Well, one of you is going to serves as mayor for the next term. Do you have any specific priorities, specific maybe projects or something like that you would like to see happen? But there's just a couple minutes. What do you guys want to talk about? This has been fascinating.
I agree.
This conversation has exceeded my wildest expectations. So.
or just why vote for you? That could be the simplest too.
Well, you would vote for me if you agree with the kinds of things I've said, and you would vote for Will if you agree with the kinds of things he said. That's just the fact of the matter. We're both Christian men. We both believe Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. And so really, if you agree with the filter he operates with on that, and you think that's the right way, when you look at the scriptures and you think, yep, I agree with that, well, you should vote for Will. And if you agree with the way when I look at the scriptures and I say that's the filter I'm operating on, well, then you probably should vote for me.
Yeah, certainly that's what elections are about, right? Figure out who do you think is going to represent you the best in the position that they're going to be serving in. And I think there are certainly some similarities in background, but I think the major differences are just around sort of experience and kind of having dealt with some of these issues before, and whereas I appreciate Marc saying that, hey, you'll go in and figure it out as it goes forward. Well, I've been doing that for a while now.
Yeah, 6 years, right?
At least on the council, and I've dealt with a lot of these issues in my prior career as well. So, Stillwater's, I think, in a really exciting time. I think there's lots of cool stuff going on. I'm really excited. I mean, just to kind of touch on your question about projects, I'm really excited about the redevelopment of Boomer Lake Station. Really excited about the possibility of the convention center coming in, the conference center on Duck Street. We've got cool new things coming in downtown, just a block from here. We've got, just across the street from here, the Block 34 park that's going to start construction here in just a few weeks. It's a really exciting time to be in Stillwater. I think, my goal is to continue that momentum forward. And I think I've been working on these projects. And so I think if you want to see that momentum continue forward, I'm probably the person to continue to work on that.
Okay, well, I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for coming in this morning. This has been great.
You're so welcome.
This has really been fascinating. I'm so excited about this. And this has been Grassroots, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again to Work It for sponsoring this series. For more information about Studio Stillwater and how you can help support our mission as a listener or sponsor, go to studiostillwater.net. There you can sign up for emails, get a free sticker, or send us a message. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.